There is a real balance between your profit and your tenant satisfaction. There's a real cost that comes with a vacant property and the tenant changeover. You have lost rent, you have leasing fees, you've got marketing fees, inspection costs, but also there's a risk of an unknown. All the application checks in the world doesn't guarantee a perfect tenant. However, if you've had a tenant for 5 years and you know them intimately, you know they're good people to work with, they're genuine, they're honest, they look after your investment, they pay their rent on time and they're nice to deal with, there's something to be said about keeping those tenants happy and keeping them in the property too. If a tenant knows that they're going to be paying $300 a quarter or every 2 months for their electricity bills, they don't want to save that potential by paying an extra $50 every week definitely on rent. And that's the trade-off. So one of the things I think that goes unsaid and I guess is undervalued as well is a small gesture. Nothing beats delivering a small gift basket to the tenants on Christmas with a little note from the landlord to say thanks for being a great tenant, right?
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here's your host, Jared Mann.
G'day and welcome to another episode of Perth Property Insider. It's been a while since we've had our award-winning property manager, Jewayne, on the show. Welcome back, mate.
Thanks for having me.
I know you get sick of hearing all my property talk when we're out fishing on the boat, but I thought we'd share a bit of talk with everyone else. And today's topic is how to maximize your rental returns without losing tenants. And I kind of figured it was a bit of a key point in our cycle where, you know, rents have gone up a lot, but each month you're seeing new clients come to us that their properties are still under rented and their property managers haven't kept up with things or haven't had those careful and strategic discussions to keep the rent in line with market. And just because you want to keep good tenants doesn't mean that you shouldn't raise the rent. So I thought we could go into this today. And as interest rates are starting to decrease, we've got an opportunity here where if we keep rents in line with market and interest rates start to come back a bit, we could be getting back to the, you know, neutral territory and your property's not costing you as much to hold. So I think it's really important on the backdrop of the interest rates too to make sure our rents are kept up.
Oh, totally. I think we should be trying to achieve a fair market price regardless of the market conditions to make sure it's fair for both parties too.
So give me some of the background on the difficult choice, well, potentially difficult, it could be easy, between increasing your rents and your profits versus keeping your tenants satisfied. What are some of the things we need to start to consider here?
Look, there is a real balance between, you know, your profit and your tenant satisfaction. There's a real cost that comes with a vacant property and the tenant changeover. You have lost rent, you have leasing fees, you've got marketing fees, inspection costs, but also there's a risk of an unknown. What I mean by that is a great high quality tenant, you know that you've got someone good. You know, you've got them there paying their rent, looking after the property. When you're placing a new tenant, there's an unknown factor, which makes it a bit riskier too. So all the application checks in the world doesn't guarantee a perfect tenant, unfortunately. However, if you've had a tenant for 5 years and you know them intimately, you know, they're good people to work with, they're genuine, they're honest, they look after your investment, they pay their rent on time and they're nice to deal with, there's something to be said about keeping those tenants happy and keeping them in the property too. So yeah, I think that's got to be a balancing act between the two.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess we do have our quality tenant guarantee, Jewayne, but that certainly helps people with peace of mind. We do go to the nth degree on screening tenants, but even then, as you say, like we still need to see that they're as good in real life as they are on paper.
Correct. The proof is in the pudding. You'll only really know once you start working with them how quality they really are.
So I think that a lot of things, it comes down to how do we do this strategically? And take me through your thinking on this.
Well, rent reviews in WA are now only able to be done annually. Okay, that's based on the changes to the Residential Tenants Act that has come through quite recently.
That's probably why we need to, you know, also make the most of them too, because you could do it every 6 months. You could do a $20 increase here and a $30 increase there. And now, if you take the same approach, you're going to be stuck with it for a year.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess that's why we really need to make sure that we're comparing like-for-like properties with their CMA. You know, we need to justify those rent increases and make sure that we're getting the value from that rent increase where required.
What's the CMA? You know, not every listener speaks real estate agent talk.
CMA, comparative market analysis. right? So like for like properties, trying to identify what the fair market price might be. I will just, I guess, start with a word of warning. Recently, I've spoken to a landlord who was using another property manager who's increased the rent by $50 at the lease renewal time based on what the manager had told him. The manager didn't provide a rental appraisal, didn't provide a rental report. It was just a quick combo over the phone. And of course, the landlord was super happy to take that increase because the cost of owning the investments were increasing too. So he thought $50 a week, and why not? After he signed that lease, he did give me a call just to do a third-party rental price check. When I was doing the rental appraisal, even after that $50 rent increase, the property was still under rented by $200 per week. I was able to provide a comparative market analysis with comparable properties to justify the price. And he was very, very annoyed with his current manager, or the guys that he were working with. They've now locked him into a 12-month lease, collecting $200 below market rent without him actually knowing that was the market price. So that's a whopping $10,000 in lost rent for that particular owner. And needless to say, he's since left that property management company and come over to us. So, the reason I'm sharing that is I think you got to make sure you're double checking and making sure you're actually getting market rent. And if a property manager simply says, this is what it is, just ask for a little bit of proof. They should have done that before calling you anyway, and making sure that you're keeping up to that. So I think it's a very, cautious tale, but keep in mind, if you're an investor, get a little bit of proof to back up what people are saying.
And you want to stay as the decision maker. You want your property manager to do the work for you. You shouldn't really have to be jumping on, realestate.com and, preparing your own analysis and data. It can be not a too bad idea if you do want to just, cross-check what they're providing. But if the trust's there with your manager, as I expect it would be for the majority of our clients, they're going to get that evidence to look over. You do need to make sure you're comparing apples with apples. So often when people compare on realestate.com, they don't have all the information at their fingertips that a good property manager would have. When we compare in the background, we can see the size of the internal living areas. We can see, we spend the time to look through and see, what are the, what's the overall condition of the property? What's the finish level? What's the location? Looking at street view and making sure of that. We check how long ago the data was, how long ago those other comparable properties were leased. Because in certain areas, prices have softened a bit. We need to be looking at the most current data, whereas in others, it might still be relevant from 2 or 3 months ago. And, there's probably a whole range of other factors that I'm not even mentioning that when we've been, appraising properties for 5+ years, for most of our managers, there's a lot of subtleties that can go into that pricing as well. So
No, I totally agree. And I mean, if we just go back to that story for a moment, if the owner was advised that was a fair market rate, the decision he may have made might have been totally different. But because he wasn't advised, he wasn't, he didn't know the full facts of where the market was at. Of course, he's going to trust his property manager. So you're right. I think if you really do trust your property manager, they're providing that proof to you, then you probably don't need to be doing a secondary check. But in this case where he didn't get that information, he just didn't have all the information to make the right decision.
I guess it's one thing, as you point out, to know that the market value is this, and I'm going to offer my tenant slightly below. At least then when you go to the tenant, you tell them that exact thing. The market value is this. The owners come back and they've decided to offer you, appreciating that you're a great tenant, offering you this lesser amount. They then feel like they've had a win. The tenant might not even know that they're still $200 a week under market either. So they're just taking it for granted effectively, and you're not getting that, that win emotionally from them too. So
it's about the delivery of and communicating that in that message as well. It's all about the delivery. And you're right there, Jared. If a tenant feels like they're going up even by $30 per week, it does still feel like a kick in the teeth to some because they're great tenants. And why is it going up 30 a week?
I'm looking after the property. I've done lots of improvements. I've improved the garden. I'm taking care of this. Like, no one else has told me they've had a rental increase lately. Why am I getting one?
Yeah. And that's why I think it's important, like you said, to really set the parameter around where the market is. And, even if you're offering a $20 or $50 per week rent discount, the tenants need to be aware that this is fair market price and we are reducing it a little bit. So we're taking 30 a week more, but we could otherwise be taking 60 or 70 if we went to the market today to try and replace the tenant, right? And as I said, we're not just kicking a tenant out for $10 or $20. We really treat them with respect. And, I think they make this investing thing work. They're the cash flow, right? But at the same time, we need to get that balance right to make sure that we're getting near enough market rate to make the investment worthwhile for the investor too.
So what's some other tips for, I guess, communicating these increases with a little bit more care rather than, just sending it off and having the blowback hit you?
Yeah, look, I think a phone call is always the best way to deliver any sort of message. There's got to be some way of communicating it backward and forward. And I think emails sometimes can rub off the wrong way. So I think picking up the phone and having that conversation. But I think the key thing here is just making sure that they understand where that market price is and how much you're looking at adjusting it to, and the discount that they're entitled to as well. So I know a lot of landlords have obviously re-rented to tenants, renewed leases, and just kept that rent a little bit lower than market value to keep the tenants happy and reward them for their good relationships too.
Just real quick before we continue on with the episode, are you getting my email updates yet? If you're not, you're missing out on our suburb intelligence reports, which we tailor and prepare for your individual suburbs of interest, showing advanced stats and insights. Must get onto those. And I also send out exclusive invitations to our events, including webinars, sundowners, and workshops. So if you're not getting those, head on over to investorsedge.com.au/join and make sure you're receiving my email updates.
I guess it's always worth sort of in discussion, reminding them of the larger context to things too. So when you remind them that, hey, if you take a look around, by all means, you'll see similar properties are renting for a similar amount. Your changeover costs, the last thing we want you to do is move out. We'd love to keep you as a tenant. You've been fabulous. It's really that whole meat and the sandwich thing, isn't it? You come in with, hey, you're doing such a wonderful job. You're paying your rent. We really appreciate you. Run through the increase in the rental price, the justification for that, and that larger context. And then, really finishing out by hoping that they'll stay, that, no one wants the changeover costs, them included, because let's face it.
Yeah, well, that's right. On the way out, they're paying potentially for a removalist. There's that added stress of moving as well. Like, let's not discount that. Moving's very painful. And also they're stepping into the unknown. They don't know the new landlord if they're going to be any good either. So yeah, look, reminding them of those opportunity costs and the things that they might be facing is also a good way to make sure they understand, the ramifications of that decision too.
Well, that all makes a lot of sense. So what else can we perhaps do to look at optimizing our rent or getting a bit more rent if possible?
Yeah, look, I get asked a lot about upgrades, what's worth doing, what's not. And when we're talking upgrades, we're speaking of things like air conditioning and a dishwasher in certain properties. I think those are musts now. Not very many tenants I know want to take on a property without air conditioning, particularly when you're doing a viewing on a 40-degree day. And I think dishwashers have now moved from that sort of luxury space into what's now more a necessity space, with everyone being a bit more time poor. So I'm not sure if they're actually going to increase your rent price, but it's actually going to increase the desirability of your property. More tenants may apply, and through that method, you may be able to see a little bit more in terms of increased demand, increased price. What I haven't seen though, tenants haven't really been willing to pay extra for solar panels.
Yeah, I'm getting asked this a lot at the moment with the rebates, and it's like, hey, I could get a new system, get some batteries on it. Does that mean that I could, charge an extra $50 a week? Well, that's the question I've been getting.
Yeah, I've got the same question, yeah. So we might be speaking to the same people. But I think that the thing to think about is, if a tenant knows that they're going to be paying $300 a quarter or every 2 months for their energy bills, their electricity bills, they don't really want to save that potential by paying an extra $50 every week, definitely on rent, right? And that's the trade-off. If you're saying I want $50 a week extra in rent, then that's still $200 rent more that they're paying, which otherwise would just pay for their power bill. So it's one of those things where I think it nullifies itself. And I think there'll be a tipping point when energy prices get to an exorbitant amount that tenants will start to look for solar and look for that. But for the most part at the moment, I haven't seen solar really demanding a higher rental price. than something that might be next door that doesn't.
Well, I'm not seeing it on the sale side either. Buyers, I get some retirees that look for it, and that's where they're real money conscious. So, but ironically, because they're so money conscious, it's always hard for me to, get a really good offer out of them anyway, because they're pinching and saving on their downgrade, and they want every extra dollar. So they can be pretty shrewd negotiators, Jewayne. I'll tell you, not like the fully emotional buyers where money isn't as big a problem. They don't mind throwing the extra at something, and they don't often get excited about solar. I'll tell you that much. They get more excited about the kitchen or the bathroom or, just how they can see their lifestyle in the property being. So I have heard from other agents over east that with power prices having gone up higher in some of the other states, that it's becoming, energy efficiency and solar is becoming a much greater sought after and checked thing. I think in Queensland, they've got mandatory energy ratings that they have to display. Might even be the same in Victoria. They've got, they're a lot more sort of conscious of all these things. So we'll get there. But at the moment, the answer is probably no. It could be worth, there is some potential there. Maybe if you see yourself moving back into your investment property and you want to have those solar savings later, weigh that up against the time periods as to how long solar lasts. But there is going to be some pretty significant rebates on offer. And for our home, for instance, we've got the solar panels. I'll probably get a battery put on just to future-proof it a bit as well. Like, will everyone even go down the road of having electric vehicles? That we're probably in the fork in the road on that. There could be other technologies, other things that come out, and then not as much interest on the driving car front as well. So I think the cars have pushed a lot of the extra desire for solar panels as well. So, but yeah, was there anything else that could add value? Or I guess what I've found worked is asking your tenant, what would they value? Is there anything else, any other improvements that they'd like added to the property? They're the ones that live there. They're the ones that know. They're the ones that are going to pay the extra for something if they're willing to. So ask them. Don't try to come up with it all yourself.
Yeah, 100%. No, that's number one in the negotiation when tenants are looking at moving too, asking what's wrong with the property or why they're moving, because if we can solve that problem for them, why wouldn't you solve it, right? And I think it's also got to line up with the type of tenant demographic that would otherwise be living in that area. But if it's something that most tenants want, why not make it more tenant friendly? Why not make it more appealing to the tenants and keep them in for a longer period too?
Well, there's plenty of tenants that we've kept over the years by installing an alarm system or a security screen when, they can have a break-in nearby, or they could have been broken into themselves. That could be, prompting the fear of need to get out of this area. But those sort of things can just make people feel safe. And again, it's probably not going to get you extra rent when you go to release it, but add to that desirability that if someone's already pretty interested in your house, it could be the thing that tips them over, those extra little features. Hey, this one's got those security measures where the other one doesn't. I'll put my application in on that one first. And then you might have a few more quality tenants to choose from.
Yeah, look, and I also notice it's still quite a tight rental market out there. So I think when you're driving down to what tenants value most today, time and time again, what we see is that nice, well-kept properties, clean, in good condition, that's what people are after, right? And so make sure you do invest that money to upkeep your property, repaint it, refloor it where required. And, those old, dated, sunburnt floral curtains from 4 decades ago, whatever, maybe it's time to have those replaced so it modernizes it and makes it feel a bit more appealing for tenants. But what I tend to see is tenants love those new, well-kept properties because it is desirable to live in.
And it's definitely going to become more important as the market does start to change, as you mentioned. If we just think back to 2016 to 2019, when you're up against 10 other properties that you're competing with, nothing beats clean, well presented, good condition. And thankfully, that's one of our criteria for coming on board with us, because once things are at a good standard, then our property managers can go through, they can spot where things are starting to slip and catch the tenant up on, or get them to address it. Again, and it's how you deliver that, not catch them up. I've got to be careful about that. But my team's way more amazing at delivering these kind of things to the tenants too. So you're not supposed to agree, so freely there, Jewayne. They're masters at emotional intelligence and, connecting with our tenants, building rapport. And when you got that relationship as well, it means that the delivery of these things can land a lot better.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that.
So what else have we got to cover on this? We've got a few different, restrictions when it comes to timing of leases and how long we offer things for. What's your advice around this area?
Look, usually when you're starting off a tenancy and you're starting to get to know that tenant that you've just placed, I'd recommend a 12-month lease, right? Gives both parties a bit of security. And in WA at the moment, we still have that no grounds termination clause. So after a fixed term lease agreement, we can ask a tenant to vacate without providing a specific reason. So look, if the tenants are great, there's no problem renewing, but if they're not necessarily the desirable tenant that you're after the 12-month period, you can ask them to move on and, free yourself of that too. So I think it's important that, you start with a 12-month, but once you know those tenants are fantastic, they've proved themselves, they're capable to pay rent on time and they look after the property well, you can look to renew for another 24, 36 months to secure your future rent revenue. And you can also add in rent review clauses so that, every 12 months you can look to adjust the rent to meet the market during that longer term lease too. The main thing as well to think of is the benefit for the tenant, right? Again, as I said, no one really wants to be moving around all too frequently. So they've got the security of a longer period of time and they won't need to stress so much about being asked to vacate in 12 months. So it can really be a win-win for both parties. So longer term leases can certainly work. And I think it's worth considering if you've got a good tenant in place as well.
Well, as you'd probably know, we want to make sure that owners think of the ramifications when they sign for longer than 12 months, because I'm pretty hesitant in general for anyone to do a longer than 12-month lease. This is how I feel about the topic, because I've firsthand seen countless people, and every year, there's still more and more landlords that have every intention of keeping the property for 2 to 3 years. Their situation changes. They then want to sell the property, and we're restricted to only selling to investors or coming to an agreement with the tenant to compensate them and end that agreement. So there's definitely a balancing act with this. When it comes to your time periods, a lot of clients at the moment, when they're considering, getting out of a property, they're actually extending the lease and doing it 6 months at a time. So you got to weigh up how the tenant would feel about that. But also at the moment, it's pretty hard to see beyond 6 months, let alone beyond a year, let alone 2 or 3 years, what your situation might be, what the world economy might be, what Trump might do to blow things up. Let's hope his trade war cools off and it's just old news in a month or two. But that's part of you really need to think about your exit strategy and what your overall strategic plan is for the property. And regardless of being clear on those things, I'd be very hesitant to see someone sign for longer than 12 months unless it was an exception, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree, but I think at the same time, there's every grounds to be providing those in certain circumstances too. So like Jared, I totally agree with you. You need to look at what your exit strategy is, but at the same time, it can certainly be a big win for both parties and something to consider if it's right for you.
As long as you go into it knowing ramifications, knowing what you're committing yourself to, knowing that a lease can't be dissolved unless both parties agree when you want to sell it. And probably that's we try to remind owners of that whenever we come to renew the lease, just how important that having some flexibility is if you do want to look at selling, and it's just a question of when, not if. So, okay, well, we've covered a lot today, probably more than I even thought we would, which is good. So hopefully everyone's gotten some things out of that. I guess in wrap up, what were the takeaways from today?
Look, a couple of things I think we can do is, when you are looking at renewing a lease, making sure that you do your rental comparison, or at least have your property manager present that to you, not just rely on a gut feeling from a property manager, having information to make a better decision. Upkeep your property. It's really important to keep your tenants and also protect the value of your asset too. Any tenant maintenance items that they've reported, jump on those quickly as well if you can. And look, I think when you're looking at renewing a lease with a tenant, just remind them of what the fair current market price is, so that they're knowing that they're going to get that discount. They're understanding the discount you're providing them. And I guess as a last thing that I'll mention, which we didn't really cover off today, but a nice little tip to, I guess, win over your tenants, shall I say? The idea of keeping your tenants for a longer period of time basically reduces your vacancy. So one of the things I think that goes unsaid and I guess is undervalued as well is a small gesture. Nothing beats delivering a small gift basket to the tenants on Christmas with a little note from the landlord to say, thanks for being a great tenant, right? And, it sounds like such a basic and simple thing, but sometimes you give a little, you can get a little back on the other side. And so I reckon that, one of the things we can do is landlords is really just show that appreciation for the tenants when they've been great tenants, not just by discounting the rent, but maybe spending $50 or $100 on a gift basket and rewarding them for their long-term commitment to you as well.
Yeah, good one. And it could be on the anniversary of when they started their lease or any sort of little milestones to celebrate things and just show them that you're grateful for them treating the property well and being great tenants. So sounds good. Well, I guess if you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe so you're going to be first to know when important changes are happening to our Perth market and how to take advantage of them. I'd appreciate any reviews or shares if you can send it out to your friends. And every day, Jewayne, I guess we're hearing from listeners just like you who over the next 1 to 6 months, they're thinking of either buying a high-performing property or having, a stress-free property management experience or selling their property for the best price. So our award-winning team are here to help you with your journey and help you improve your life with Perth property. So feel free to give us a call, reach out. You can check out our different service pages on our website at investorsedge.com.au and we'll see if we can help you with your property investing journey. So thanks for joining us, Jewayne.
Thanks, Sharad. Thanks for having me.
See you, mate.
Just a reminder, the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.